Welcome to the kbbreview podcast. I'm Andy Davies, and this is the first episode of a special three-part series we're calling Changemakers. It's all in association with our very good friends at Hettich, and together we're meeting people or companies that are truly forging their own path in the UK kitchen and bathroom sector. They're shaping opinions, trends, and business practices in a way that genuinely shifts the industry zeitgeist. And I'm very pleased to say that my co-host in this series is Hettich UK Managing Director Simeon Gabriel. Hello, Simeon.
Great to be here, and I have to say I'm rather looking forward to these conversations.
Yeah, me too. It's really interesting, this actually, just to try and find those people that are trying to do something a little bit different. Well, look, before we get into our first one here, give us an idea of why you think, from your perspective as a supplier and a big brand, why do you want to hear stories from people who are trying to do things differently?
Well, I was keen to do this because when it comes down to it, every industry needs innovators to really drive that industry forward. And when you can find those people who disrupt things, who think a bit differently and challenge the status quo, then it means that your industry isn't going to become stagnant. And it's that creativity and innovation that's really at the heart of what we do at Hettich. So I was keen to find others who do a similar sort of thing and have a similar sort of approach.
Yeah, I think these are the people that give industries forward momentum, aren't they? They're the people that are trying to push the boundaries a little bit and the other people falling behind them sometimes.
Oh, it's critical to have those leaders, whether they're thought leaders, whether they're innovators in process, or whether they're innovators in product, or they just look at an industry in a slightly different way and then they take other people with them. Yeah,
absolutely. So look, our first changemaker in this episode, well, he's a real pioneer in the field of accessible and multi-generational kitchen design, and he's Adam Thomas. A wheelchair user himself, he has a unique understanding of how kitchens can and should be designed to allow full use by everyone of any ability, age, size or shape. And he's also a very inspirational guy when it comes to explaining just what a business opportunity this is for retailers and designers. So we met up with him recently, didn't we? And what were your thoughts coming out of that conversation with him?
I was inspired. I have to say I thoroughly enjoyed meeting Adam. He's clearly an absolute expert in his field. He's got a fascinating personal story. I came away actually really thinking about our own business and how we can then look at the market in a different way and how we can perhaps adapt the use of our products to help people with accessibility issues.
I think that's one thing he always does really well. He really opens up the idea of possibility.
Yeah, well, I think he also helped me to think about the market in a different way, and the fact that with multi-generational living, for example, we're facing challenges that we haven't actually faced before, and different levels of accessibility in homes at the same time. So, yeah, really interesting guy.
So here we go. Let's meet Adam Thomas. Right, so here he is, Mr. Adam Thomas. Hello, sir. Thank you for sparing us a bit of time.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak about accessible design.
Well, it's always good to hear you tell your story, and I think that story is moving on all the time as well, which I think is what's so interesting about it. But let's go back to the beginning a bit, because I think it's always interesting to hear how people get started, right? And because nobody is born wanting to be a kitchen designer, let's be honest, right? And I think your personal circumstances are linked very closely with your professional expertise, obviously. So talk to us about how you actually got into being a designer of kitchens in the first place.
I left secondary school at the age of 15 with not many qualifications. In those days, I called myself dyslexic. Now I think neurodivergent. I was good at drawing, good at technical drawing, had a few qualifications in those sorts of exams, and I wanted to be a children's book illustrator. And I was on the dole, and in those days in 1979 in fact, when I was first looking for work, they'd find you 3 jobs and you had to go for one of those interviews, and the first 2 was nothing to do with drawing or art or anything, and the 3rd job interview was for a kitchen designer. And I turned up on a motorbike with long hair, no portfolio, working cash in hand on a friend's farm, doing a bit of hay baling and things. And I literally just went to get my ticket signed, and the person in the showroom gave me a plan and said, would I draw it, what I thought it would look like in 3D? And this is years before computer and CAD. And I did an artist's impression of what I thought it would look like, and he offered me a job. And on and off, I stayed with him for 39 years.
Wow.
So that was it. And I never thought, I've always loved design, and I loved design going through in my education, if you can call it an education. And he was an incredible person and really helped me. And I was with him for about a year and a half. and he taught me a lot in that time. And then I had a motorbike smash where I broke my back, got a puncture on my back tyre going around a bend, and just skidded off. And as I went up the curb, it snapped my back in half. And I did that, I suppose you say, ironically, a couple of miles away from Stoke Mandeville Hospital, which is near to where I lived anyway. I went in there, I had 6 months of rehab, and Richard, the owner of the showroom, was an incredible person that would even consider employing then a disabled person. With him and myself knowing absolutely nothing about it whatsoever. He even got a old-fashioned drawing board adapted and had all the bit you put your feet on, unwelded, cut off, and adapted a drawing board so I could go back to drawing. This was in the days of the old film and rotary ink pens and scraping with knife blades. And whilst I was in hospital, he spent a lot of money on making the showroom accessible, because the toilets were up 5 steps, couldn't operate the front door, couldn't get from the parking into the building. All the displays, in those days, you had a little tweeze setting where you stepped up and then stepped down and then stepped up again. And he had the whole lot taken out and lowered at one level. And he showed the confidence in me, and I sort of showed loyalty with him.
It's interesting, isn't it, that sort of enforced adaptation at a time when that wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
And there was no sort of legal obligation to do it for a start, but there was no sort of access to experts to help you do it.
No, there were no grants or anything in those days, really.
So how much do you think him being in that furniture maker, designer, you being a designer, helped inform that? It's like you got a designer's brain to be able to think how we're going to solve that problem.
Yeah, there were 2 options. We either move and find a more accessible premise, which probably would have been the sensible thing to do, but we had, a good high street location. And so we looked at other ways of making it accessible and coming up. But this is even the industry, and the industry still to this day works that you're an individual designer, salesperson, etc. A client comes in and you nab them and they're your client, and you're going to design and sell and do the survey. We look practically. Most of the people's homes I'm not going to be able to access, so I'm not going to be able to get in them. And this is years before we started getting into accessible design. This was just designing for non-disabled people. And so we changed our way we worked, and we worked as a team. And we actually then found, between the 2 of us, our joint sales doubled, because what I'm best at, what I think I'm best at, is designing, speaking with clients, giving people inspiration, selling people ideas. And Richard was brilliant at quoting a kitchen at £60,000 and 10p, and it turning out being £60,000 and 9p. He was quite, I would like to say, OCD. If he ever listened to this, I'm really sorry, but you were great at doing all the things I hated. So we worked very well as a team.
I think at that moment in your life as well, you're going through a very traumatic personal thing, and to have somebody show that much faith in you, he wanted you to carry on working until you were good at your job, and he was prepared to do all those adaptations.
It's only in hindsight I've really realised that. I think a lot of people, when you have a catastrophic injury, I think subconsciously at some point you either decide you're going to get on and do it, and you don't in your head have that conscious thought and make it your body, or you just decide, depending I suppose on your personality, your mental health, those sorts of issues, whether you're going to cope or not. And I kind of did. Again, if you'd had asked me before my injury at 17, could you cope with being paralysed from the high chest with no movement, no feeling, being a wheelchair user for the rest of your life, I'd have said no, switch me off, kill me. I could not cope with living that situation. You wake up and you're in that situation, and in my case, I can't speak for everybody or anybody else, that didn't happen to me. I just went into hospital, I didn't walk in, I got taken in on a stretcher or a trolley, went in walking, came out as a wheelchair user, and kind of got on with my life. I also had amazing rehab, and in my situation it makes such a difference to go through a spinal unit, which is a whole new campaign, well, not a new campaign, it's something that half the people who end up breaking their backs and necks don't go through a spinal unit, so they don't have that specialist care. And I mean, 2 weeks after I came out of hospital, 2 of the physios just packed me into the back of a car in the middle of winter, drove me, we went on a ferry across through Holland, through into West Germany and into East Germany and to the Berlin Wall, when the Berlin Wall was up around Berlin. And again, they just showed me all the still crazy things that you could still do as a wheelchair user. And this is when nothing was accessible, absolutely nothing. And I had really very, very few, if any, basic human rights at all.
Well, this is what's so fascinating about your story, I think, because, you were a designer, you were a young guy, and, young guys have certain motivations, if you know what I mean, right? But your accident, the circumstance you found yourself in, sort of ignited this activism in you, ignited this sort of campaigning element in you. And suddenly your eyes are opened, if you like, to the injustice of it all.
I mean, that came about over a number of years after I got injured. I had a great group of friends, and I knew these people from about the age of 11 to 12, about 30, 35 people, and I'm still friends with most of them, or the ones that are alive. And we've always stayed incredibly close. We're like a really big family. And so if we went to a gig, I mean, I've probably been to 500-600 gigs in my life. And again, no gig centres or venues were accessible, but we would turn up and we would dare them to kick me out, and about 4 of my friends would just pick me up and carry me in. But it started annoying me more and more that was the case. And with my design brain, I could easily see that it didn't need to be that way. And I started reading. There was an amazing man called Mike Oliver, who's sadly dead now, who is an academic who wrote something called The Social Model of Disability. And as soon as you understand what the social model is compared to what's called the medical model is, historically, going back to the Victorian day, we locked disabled people away. If there was an issue that the family had a disabled person in the family, they got put in an institution, they got locked up, and that's how, as a society, we dealt with them. And then we started a charitable system in the Victorian day where we started saying that little Johnny has got whatever, polio, whatever their condition is, we're going to try and fix it through medicine, through the medical model, and we're going to raise money to solve the problem. And then sort of starting in America and coming over to this country in the 80s, after the Vietnam War, really, we had what was developed as the social model, which my impairment does not stop me watching a film in the cinema. What stops me watching the film in the cinema are the 5 steps up to the cinema. So if society creates or designs out those steps, I'm not disabled. And that's kind of what the social model is. And we can put that into any area of life and sort of bring it around into kitchens. You know, if we understand how disabled people work, how a disabled person cooks, how a disabled person lives in their home, we can design for that. And knowing how to design that way does not cost a penny more, on the price of the kitchen. It's just knowing what to do and what not to do. And when you understand that, it's like a light bulb moment. And then we can design kitchens that everyone can use.
I mean, these are all, look, designers, kitchen or otherwise, find solutions for problems, right? That's kind of what they do.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes you have to be able to see the problem in order to know that you need a solution. And so if you just get on and off a bus without thinking about it, but the moment you suddenly can't get on or off a bus, you suddenly think, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But it is a problem that can be solved by good design.
Yes, everything can be, or virtually everything can be solved by good design. Certainly the built environment and our living. I mean, when I first had my injury in 1981, I did a quick check and I made a list of 100 people, including my own family members, of how many homes I could get into. 1 out of 100. I went back, I was looking for something else, and I found that list about 30 odd years later, and I went down the list, and it was 3. And that's in like a 30-year period, and that's how little, in a way, we've advanced with house design and building. And can you imagine what it's like when out of 100 people's homes, you can't go and visit independently 97 of them? It's quite hard to deal with. But we easily, you know, a lot of those, not all of them, but a lot of those homes were fairly new builds. So there's nothing stopping us making those homes accessible, multi-generational.
I suppose it's a lack of foresight rather than a deliberate attempt to not do it, if you know what I mean. It's not thinking everything through from beginning to end.
Yes, there's many issues. It's training architects, going through a 6-year degree course, not having one day on accessible design might be a good place to start. You know, again, having a degree course where we can train kitchen designers in accessible design, or having courses. There's a lot of work needs to be done. There are some brilliant organisations out there that are doing this in the accessible world, but they're in their own little bubble, they're in their own little community, they're working with governments, they're working with councils, but when you know where they are and how to access that information literature, it's out there.
And I guess it has that kind of occupational health kind of badge on it.
Well, yes, this sort of...
It's their problem, not everyone's issue.
Yeah, I mean, this brings you into one of my issues with the industry over the years from when I first started in it, after I became a disabled person, is I couldn't understand why the market isn't taking it seriously. The accessible market, which is now called the purple pound, is massive. Home improvements in this country, I mean, it's an unbelievable figure that when I say it, you will not believe me and you'll go off and look it up, is over 300 billion a year. Why, as a business, would you not be going after that market? Why? Okay, the kitchen section isn't 300 billion. We're just a portion of that, but that's the home improvement section. It's a huge, huge market. Government statistics, over 16 million disabled people now in this country. That's around 1 in 5 of the population. Why are you not servicing 1/5 of the population? To me, it beggars belief. And I've been banging on about this from day one, And I still end up having these sorts of conversations.
Would I be right in thinking that actually a lot of the time it's just thinking about using existing products in a different way rather than actually reinventing things?
That's a huge thing of what I've done, because there haven't been companies designing appliances for disabled people and or kitchens for disabled people, etc. I've come at it, let's use standard products and make them work for disabled people, and come up with design principles that if you adhere to the design principles, you can't go far wrong. And then working with manufacturers on occasions to develop product, but it's 99% of the time is finding a product and thinking, well, actually, if we just did it this way, you could do X.
Because good design is good design.
Yes. Again, I won't mention names, but appliance manufacturer who came up with some fantastic ideas and were marketed. I think they didn't even realise that how good their products were for disabled and older people. And in 20 years, they never marketed their products at that audience. Yet, out of the last 500 kitchens I've done, I've only sold their ovens in my kitchens, because there's no other oven that can touch them on safety.
It's very strange, because I've been to your kitchen and I've been to your house and I've seen, and it's quite a weirdly, it's such an eye-opening thing, because when you explain it, it's so obvious, right? But you don't think about it until someone's explained it to you. That's what I find so interesting about it. Like, the big side-by-side fridge freezers, how much effort you need to get the door open, for example. If you haven't got the sort of purchase of it from the right height, it's a hard thing to do. So you have to pop the seal to get the door. Just little tiny things that you just don't think about.
But how brilliant to be able to have a sensor or mechanical aid that you can either speak or touch the door and the door opens. So you think how many disabled people have arthritis and or, say, a tetraplegic, somebody who's broken their neck, who's got no hand movement, or somebody with multiple sclerosis who's got very weak fingers, who can't be independent in their home because they can't access the fridge. But if you can come up with a solution to open the fridge, how brilliant's that? How does a visually impaired person operate an oven? Well, the simple thing is to have your oven voice activated, so you can just say, Alexa, turn my oven on to 180 degrees, and all of a sudden, a visually impaired person can use the oven. Alexa, what temperature is my oven on? Your oven is on 175 degrees. It's just, all these things aren't rocket science. It's just teaming up the right people to realise what the potential is. Most of the answers are already, and solutions are out there. And with things like assistive technology coming on, finally, I mean, in any other area of the house, we've got real advancements in assistive technology, apart from the kitchen, which...
Why do you think that is?
It goes back to the industry not accepting, not understanding and not acknowledging that there is this market, there isn't the purple pound. But it's not just a purple pound now, because it's crossing over massively with the grey pound. We're all using the buzz phrase future-proofing. When you're getting to 65, you're retiring, you've got this pot of money, you're going to do your house for the last time. Why would anyone consider designing their next kitchen with a built-under oven? 80% of all falls in a kitchen are caused by bending. So what do? Design out bending. So what don't you do? Design a built-under oven. The amount of kitchens I go into, and they're totally happy with it, because at that time when they've put the kitchen in at 65, they're still fine. But percentage-wise, by the time that 65-year-old gets to 70 or 75, they are going to have arthritis issues and or other issues. And the last thing you want to be doing is trying to bend down and take something out from your ankles, which is very heavy and hot.
But it's like you say, a lot of products that are just designed to make everyone's life a bit easier are entirely applicable in this. So, for example, most people have full extension drawers. They come all the way out, so you haven't got to go all the way to the back of the cupboard anymore. But again, it's never marketed in any way other than the standard way.
Yes.
And this is what I find so interesting when we talk about this, is it's just taking a slightly different perspective of something and seeing it from a slightly different point of view. Yeah. And the moment you do that, just suddenly think, oh God, of course. Yeah. And I wonder whether part of it is still people have an image of the accessible kitchen and they immediately picture wheelchair users.
Yeah, exactly. I totally
which
agree.
Is, as a proportion of disabled people, is actually quite small. Yeah. And so they immediately think it's about wheelchair users, but of course it's not. It's all those other things that you described.
Exactly.
And one of your philosophies is, of course, that it's not even about disabled people. It's about very tall people, very short people that they could have broken their legs skiing. They could have, everything should be able to be used by everybody.
Yes.
And that's the underlying principle of what you do.
Yeah, I mean, and again, take this further on into housing generally. I remember I think it was about 1995, actually speaking with the Labour government at the time, and they were talking about policies that they were looking at bringing in if they got in power in 97. And one of them was that one of the first things they were looking at doing was passing law that they were going to be building carbon neutral or whatever it's called housing. We're still, now whatever it is, 25 years further on, we're still not that much closer to actually achieving that. I can't understand why we're still designing houses up 3 steps. If we could just change housing policy and we could change the way we build certain percentage of housing. I mean, to me, the idea is, which other nations and populaces designed to, is that you want to be born in the house and die in the house. And we can do do that through good design. It doesn't cost a penny more. But, to be able to design a room that can start off being used as a study, but equally could be turned into a nursery or another bedroom, and designing where you've got communal areas where you could have 2 or 3 different generations living together, but then they come together to watch television or to eat or whatever. I really don't understand how we can't be working on this further to actually be creating properties like this. And again, designing rooms that are big enough to be able to do this sort of thing in. Designing kitchens that can be adapted. But equally, there are certain things that if you just put ovens in at a certain height, anyone can use them, no matter whether they're 80 or 8.
That is one of the mega trends at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
That if you look around the world, then the trend is towards more and more people of different ages wanting to use the same spaces in the house. So multi-generational living is here. So we have to design around that.
Yes, I totally agree.
But this, Simeon, the corporate wheels turn very slowly, and it's very hard for big organisations and big brands to radically change how and what they do.
Well, for me, I don't see that we do need to radically change what we're doing, because, as Adam was saying before, actually, this is all about taking existing technologies and just rethinking how we present them to designers and present them to the market, so that actually we just rethink how we approach the design process. Now, that's something that's easily achieved.
Do you think you're a pioneer in this? Because I've been talking to you for 20 years about this, and while it has moved on, it has not moved on significantly, you could argue. So pioneers tend to be people who change it and start a momentum.
A pioneer is somebody who's actually made a difference.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I would classify under that. I feel like I've got a lot of bruising on my head from where I've been banging it against a wall for a long, long time. I really feel, because of the kitchen degree course and the work that you personally have done and how you've embraced this topic, things are, and I am seeing change. I'm having people who wouldn't be interested in talking to me 10 years ago now wanting to have a chat with me. That I find really wonderful and refreshing, and it's great. Things that Symphony have done. I spent, when Richard, who I was working with for 39 years, was coming up to retirement, we looked at continuing the business, but I am not a businessman, so I wouldn't have had a wink of sleep if I'd even considered trying to buy him out to take the business on. But at that point, I didn't want to lose all the work that we'd done together for 25 years on accessible design.
But it's interesting, you had to become a specialist in that. The business had changed to become a specialist in that area because of you. Yeah.
So I went and approached a number of manufacturers with ideas of seeing whether they'd be interested in scaling up what we were doing as one-off bespoke. And it never really got anywhere. And we did that for about 5 years, looking at seeing whether we could expand. And then out of the blue, Symphony approached me, which, to be honest, I couldn't believe. And we had some initial meetings, which is another thing totally separate. There's a big campaign at the moment where disabled people often get asked to do something for a company, not particularly, I'm not talking about in the kitchen industry, but just generally. And it's just expected that they will do it for free because it's charity, and almost like the company thinks they're being great for asking a disabled person to go on ITV and talk about something or whatever. Well, it costs money to do that. Anyway, Symphony approached me and actually offered to pay me money to write a report on what I thought was wrong with their existing product and ways to improve it. And I went off and did this for 3 months and wrote a report thinking they're never going to implement what I'm suggesting. And they have done everything. They absolutely have done everything. And I point out it's not good enough just to redo a design and say, this is the brand, this is it. You've got to market correctly. You've got to train all your staff in quality. You've got to train in language. You've got to train the designers. The showrooms that you pick have got to be accessible. They've got to have accessible toilets, accessible parking, etc. And to Symphony's credit, they've done everything. And now, wow, are they reaping the reward of this? And I have no problem with a company making money out of, shall we say, disabled people, as long as it's done in the right way. It's not tokenistic. And they're actually, I don't mind as an individual paying a very, good money for a product, as long that it is a good service and a good product.
You work closely with Symphony at Hettich, don't you?
Correct,
that they're not going to do anything unless they think they're going to get the volume out of it. They are a volume business. They're a big company. This isn't worthy, the thing that they're doing. So they deserve the credit for what they're doing here, because Adam says they've spotted an opportunity here.
They've properly embraced it.
Yeah.
And, especially when you're working in the kinds of sectors that Symphony does, then, you've got to think longer term and think about how people are going to, use the kitchens that you provide over a longer period of time. And as we've just discussed, when it comes down to it, most kitchens now are going to be used by multi-generations and people of varying abilities. So therefore, you're much better off embracing that whole concept and doing it properly, which is clearly what they've done.
Yeah, it's a gap in the market, isn't it? And they're working closely with you. They're doing a fantastic job. They deserve the credit for it. Yeah, because I think they've done so well with it. One of the things I think that's really interesting in your involvement there is that you do go and talk to the retailers. You are training the retailers on this. What kind of response do you get when you start talking to them about it? And because look, we're all English, right? Mm-hmm. And is it about, once they feel there's a permission to talk about it and a permission to ask you questions about it, that they sort of, out it all comes because they think, oh, thank God I can finally ask what it's like to use a wheelchair and what it's like.
And I can only say, genuinely, I've only had good experiences. I haven't had one person where I thought, this isn't going to work. And I am totally open with everyone, and say from day one, you can ask me un-PC questions, because the whole point is that you've got to learn. You've got to be able to learn how to communicate with somebody without feeling awkward, without making stupid comments, without doing the classic, have you got reversing lights on that, or have you got a license for that, or those sort of crass things. But we teach at that level to begin with. We teach language, etc., things to say and what not to say. It's important, and it's only then that you start becoming comfortable. We discuss a lot of things in accessible design and the reasons why. And again, it's the light bulb moments. You know, the amount of times I see a disabled person with which, and again, I did this in my own kitchen because I wanted to prove it potentially didn't work brilliantly. But if you design ovens into a bank of tool units, if you're cooking in that oven, you can take something out of the oven, you can turn around, take 2 steps and put it on the worktop. As a wheelchair user, if I take that casserole out of a dish, I'm stuffed. I can't move. So, but once you've had these sorts of ideas put into your head, then designing, it just becomes natural. It really isn't rocket science. But the uncomfortability thing is, I think, once you're taught how to ask questions, and the majority of disabled people are going to give you a lot of leeway, it's not an issue. You don't need to be worried or scared. And again, you just have to learn the confidence to ask questions. Occasionally you'll get the bullshit disabled person who doesn't want to talk about their impairment, but that's going to happen in all walks of life. And you haven't done anything wrong by asking. As a designer for a disabled person, you have to understand their impairment. You see me as a wheelchair user, so you're going to design as I'm a wheelchair user. But have you ever thought that I might have what's called a secondary condition? From 2 o'clock onwards, I start getting really bad backache, and my legs start to swell. So it's understanding and being able to ask the right question.
Which is funny, because it's whether you describe yourself as an accessible designer or not. Mm-hmm. Because if you're a good designer, the first thing you're going to do when you sit in front of your client is go, tell me about yourself. Yeah. Do you like to cook? How many kids do you have? Yeah. Do you like sports? Yeah. These are the questions that designers could and should ask, and the ones that are very good do that. Yeah. And therefore, part of the natural conversation is going to be, do you find that difficult? Is that our view? Do you like, what can you reach? So it's whether or not designers think of themselves as accessible designers, or they just think of themselves as designers who design for that individual client.
But those designers, have they actually, if the client has presented themselves as ambulant, outwardly non-disabled, would they even think of asking a few leading questions to find out whether that person does have, a hidden condition or whatever? Or
well, and it's also who else is living in the house. So, or who else is going to visit the house on a regular basis? So, are there elderly relatives with mobility issues who are going to come and want to stay for extended periods of time? Again, it comes down to good design. You're right, it's designing for the individual, but it's also designing for a wider concept.
I suppose the last thing you want to do is think that all disabled people are the same, right? Which is clearly not true. But I think what we're talking about here, really, and this is where you come into it in your part of the narrative, is expanding people's understanding, their own arsenal of solutions, and understanding what products are available and how they can be used.
And this is the absolute classic, is I cut my teeth. At the age of 16, I went to work. The first company we worked for was Somatic. That's what we sold, and I didn't know who Somatic were or where they were in the market or anything. And I was actually, this is in 1981, they actually paid £5,000, which I guess is a lot of money in 1981, to go on something called an Alfred Tax selling course, who was like an American guru who taught you how to sell. And I still use a lot of his techniques, and one of them is you've got features and benefits, and there's no point selling features. Features mean nothing. It's finding out about the person and you knowing what benefits there are to that item, that feature, and there might be 5 different benefits, but there might only be 3 benefits that are suitable for that client. So there's no point selling the other 2 because it won't make any difference to their life. So it's understanding your products, understanding what all the benefits are, and fitting those benefits to the individual. And again, I often don't see that in sales, or by looking at design. I can see through a design that thought process hasn't gone all the way through.
I think one of the issues in this sector is the amount of standardisation is massive, because the kitchen cabinet people don't talk to the sinks people who don't talk to the appliance people, So you have this level of standardisation where everything is a sort of similar size, similar height. I'm quite tall, so I always find worktop height is too low. Even for me, it's just too low. So I get, your back starts hurting when you're washing the dishes, because sinks are incredibly deep now. Yeah. So do you know what I mean? So there's the level of standardisation, I think, is part of the problem, is that there's loads of products out there, but they're all the same size. But what you actually need is a good knowledge of lots of varied types of product that you can apply in for whoever the individual client is, whatever they may or may not need.
Well, this sort of, I've done, out of the last 20 kitchens I've designed for disabled people and non-disabled people, I've done 2 rise and falls for non-disabled people, because they just love the idea of having a section that can be taken up and down. And they had young families families, and in my case, it was my rise and fall was designed for me, but it meant my daughter at the age of 4 could go to the fridge and open the fridge. We lowered bits in the fridge so she could reach the eggs, and at the age of 4, she could make her own omelettes. She would bring the worktop down to her level, so it was much, much safer. We cooked with induction, so that was much safer, whereas she wasn't having to stand on stools or anything. So at that level, she could start using a kitchen and participating with me and working with me a lot more. Again, because she could, I've got a great photograph of her sat on my lap. We could wheel under my rise and fall together, so she was sort of cooking, sort of leaning up against my chest. And it's great to be able to have those sorts of experience in the kitchen.
Well, it's little things like the waterfall edge on the worktop, which you think, okay, I get it because you don't want, spills coming out. But the moment you see that, you think, when my son was little, God almighty, if you could have something that's stuff pouring off the edge of the worktop, and it just makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and originally I designed that for visually impaired people, and the idea was, again, it was the light bulb moment when I started speaking with visually impaired people and finding out what the things that were the hardest to do in their own kitchens, and one was if they had a spillage and they knew it had come off the worktop, they don't know where it is on the floor, so literally they've got to go on their hands and knees and start running their hands over the dry floor until they find the wet patch. How do you stop that? Put a waterfall edge on it. And then actually I started realising, actually, it's absolutely brilliant for wheelchair users. It's great for older people who are ambulant, who haven't got anything to hold on to.
And clumsy teenagers.
Yeah.
But again, I suspect most kitchen designers wouldn't know that was an option maybe, or they wouldn't know where to source that, or they wouldn't even think that might be a possible solution to a house full of kids. It's about expanding the knowledge of what's available, I think, is what this always comes down to.
I fully believe on training. I think that appliance manufacturers and other manufacturers, when they're training, they should have a section on accessibility. Their trainers should be trained in, and I'm not saying everything. Again, it was what was fantastic when I first started working with Craig Matson and Johnny Gray on the degree course. They asked me to come and deliver a one-off accessibility lecture, and again, they then sort of had the light bulb moment and just thought, how brilliant, this should be integrated through the whole course. And sort of they asked me on, and we included in accessibility in virtually all areas of the degree course. And that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
It's
good design.
Yeah,
good design. And I do see a move. I do see things happening now, right? And again, we've been talking about this for many years. I do see a difference about it, and I think Symphony have got a lot to do with that, and to give them and the people that work with them obviously as well. That there is a light bulb moment happening, but the momentum of it is perhaps not huge.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised more kitchen companies haven't followed Symphony's lead, because quite frankly they've got the monopoly on it at the moment. But do you feel there's a momentum building?
I do.
Either now?
We will see other manufacturers definitely coming into it and pushing it more, which I think is fantastic. I love competition, and at the end of the day, it's going to help disabled people, which is kind of my goal. Just as long as it's done correctly. Language is so important. I saw a company the other day promoting something, and they said, we've done this kitchen for Johnny, who suffers from. My toes curled. And that's enough for every single disabled person to read that article and think, I'm not going near that company. Simple mistake by the PR company. But it's understanding that. Again, it really isn't rocket science, and there are companies out there who can help and guide and what have you.
And of course, everybody knows somebody.
Yes.
I think 1 in 4 households have a registered disabled person or something in it. So everybody knows somebody.
Yeah.
And so we could talk about industry initiatives and industry, but what they're actually doing is their own personal experience of something, because every company has people who work for them that would fall under this banner.
Yeah.
And I think so much of this is about having the conversation openly and without feeling a bit weird about it all, or thinking that it's a sector that exists over there and would come under the banner of medical needs or something.
Exactly.
It's actually asking people, talking to people, and not making assumptions. Right?
Yeah.
And that's what makes the real difference.
And the companies that embrace it, the first ones to embrace it, will be the ones that reap the most reward.
And they've probably already got the products in their catalogue.
Yes.
Particularly now, as you say, when you bring in voice-activated and Alexa and everything else, it opens up a whole other conversation about what that can and can't do to control everything.
Well, don't do what I did. The first time I ever saw a range of appliances which were internet, Wi-Fi controlled, got a phone from the client, you've got to come over, and I didn't even dawn on me. So this is something, not thinking, because my brain wasn't, this is in the early days, they have virtually zero Wi-Fi connectivity. So they're talking to Alexa, and the appliances aren't picking it up. But that's not the appliance's fault, that was just
in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. But again, it's knowing to ask, so next time you sell the product, you check what their connectivity is.
And understanding how it works. Again, it's expanding knowledge all the time, isn't it? Understanding Wi-Fi and how it covers the house or whatever it is becomes a part of this as well, a relative understanding or knowledge of it. I just find this stuff so interesting because it's a design discussion and it has kind of worthiness attached to it. Of course, everyone should have the same thing, but I find interesting design solutions to problems such an interesting conversation. That's ultimately all this ever is.
And at the end of the day, it is the best feeling in the world to have a client do a movie of themselves or write you a letter saying, I haven't even been able to make a cup of tea or some beans on toast for the last 15 years and now I can do X, Y and Z. I've probably been thanked in my 40-year career maybe 15 times by non-disabled clients. The letters you get, the movies you get from disabled people, because you are transforming people's lives. You're potentially taking somebody who can't even make a cup of tea on their own purely because their house hasn't been designed for them, whatever, and you're giving them their independence. You're also giving them their self-esteem, and that's worth a fortune. And if you can make money out of it as well, so much the better.
Is there an issue with their knowledge of what's available out there? Do they sort of take it for...
Again,
if someone says to them, you can't do that...
So this is a fascinating thing, again, that I see. When I get asked to write something called expert witness reports on potentially projects that have gone wrong, that often are council funded or whatever, so somebody needs to be responsible or answer the buck why the client can't use their 15, 20 grand kitchen or whatever. And I go in, and it's often quite basic reasons why they can't. And then when you're speaking to the various people who are involved, it's, well, I spoke to the client, and it's also, obviously, you've got to listen to the client, you've got to find out about them, but they don't necessarily know what's out there. Or, you know, often I'll have a client say, well, I'm used to work to the sink side on. That my answer is, well, why have you come to me then? Because I totally, you know, I want to make it fully accessible so you don't have to work side on. That's why you're paying the money. So you probably actually know more things and better products that are out there that are more suitable for this client than the client does. Yes, of course, the client knows more about their own impairment, etc. So, and what you as a designer got to do is merge the two. And again, going back to find the right benefits to suit that client's needs.
I mean, you must look at some kitchens that have been done for disabled people and just think, oh my God, why have you done that? And they're saying, well, they said that was all that was available. They said that was, we had to have it that way.
Yeah.
And you must be, again, banging your head on the...
Yeah. Often. I went to one recently where the tiler had been sent in as the subcontractor, and no one had told them the worktop was a rise and fall, and they tiled down onto electric rise and fall worktop and just left it. So, I mean that's at one really very basic level. But again, I mean, I remember, this is going back a number of years, getting called into a project, a brand new block of flats that had been built for a council in Shepherd's Bush in London, on 10 floors. On every floor there's a wheelchair accessible, fully wheelchair accessible apartment. And as they put clients in, every single kitchen had to be ripped out because the client couldn't use the kitchen. Now, the state paid for that. We paid for it as taxpayers. So we paid to have that kitchen put in. We then paid to have it ripped out and another kitchen put in. So things have improved hugely. I mean, the building regs still need to be vastly improved, but the building regs are much, much better than they were in those days. But there are still things wrong with the building regs, but they are, a lot of the design principles there are much, much better.
So do you think we need, because you're working with Symphony, obviously, so if you're a Symphony dealer, you have access to you.
Yeah.
How do we sort of get access to this information, this perspective for everybody else?
There's loads of information out there. I mean, you just got to go onto Google and you'll start finding out. There's places like the Centre for Accessible Environments. There's organisations that work in this field. I mean, I'm sure there's other experts who are doing sort of similar things to that I'm doing.
I don't think there are. Certainly not in kitchens, anyway.
There should be.
There should be.
But again, the thing I also find very interesting looking at the bathroom industry. So 25, maybe even 30 years ago, the bathroom industry came together, sort of saying, let's not have standard range and the accessible range. Let's design it universally. So now when somebody goes, most bathroom shops you go in, handles on showers that's ergonomically designed so it's easy grip. You know, there are features that you don't necessarily have the accessible. I mean, some still do the accessible range and the standard range, but most of it, the accessible, has been brought into, which is what Symphony is doing, is merging the...
Do you know what it was for me? Is when I saw my first chrome grab handle that wasn't white.
Yeah.
It was chrome.
Yeah.
And I thought, there we go.
Yeah.
Boom. Mainstream
Yes.
straight away. Because my mum, for example, has very bad arthritis.
Yeah.
And you must hear this all the time. I don't want it to look like a hospital.
Yeah.
That's her thing. And said you could get a chrome grab handle.
Yes.
She was like, oh God, finally. I'm
Yeah.
getting out of the shower.
Well,
And
why should people with disabilities not have access to the same great design that other people do?
It's weird, isn't it?
It's just a thought process that I find very
Because
difficult.
I think historically it's been seen as a different channel.
Yes,
It's been seen as a different channel.
And that's the way industry... I mean, historically, you had manufacturers that purely set up that, and there was about 3 or 4 of them that built kitchens for the disabled. And so that if you were a standard man, you just didn't touch that market. And everyone looked historically at that market being for all disabled people. If you were a disabled person, you were poor, you lived in an institution, or you lived in a care home, or whatever it happened to be, or it was a housing association property. So there was no money in the market. And basically, you had a choice of a white, grey, or beige kitchen. And it was it was at the bottom end of the market, and you had a few extra features. Things have moved on from there. It is now mainstream, and manufacturers, companies should be looking at embracing this.
Well, because there's money in it more than anything else, as you say.
300 billion.
Yeah. I mean, if I wanted an Adam Thomas kitchen, how much would it cost me?
If you need to ask the question, you can't afford it.
But this is a premium. This is a premium thing.
The Symphony range. I mean, that's the thing. If it was from my old company, yes, you do, because everything was hand built. It was totally bespoke to you. So we worked out to the millimetre what height you needed certain things, and we built doors, etc. to that, which is still a way you can go. But obviously, there's a cost involved in that. My interest was all sort of my background background was I always loved social housing and mass production, and that was the thing that I absolutely adore, and I still adore working with Symphony, is that we can take sort of my bespoke ideas and it's creating ways and working with other manufacturers such as Hettich so that we can keep the prices low. So my principle is that a Symphony accessible kitchen should cost no more than a standard kitchen, apart from potentially, if you're a wheelchair user, obviously you're going to have the cost of the rise and fall, so that's going to be an extra cost, but nothing else should cost a penny more, and everything else is just down to purely good design.
But what means it touches all points of the market is
Yes.
the point.
Yeah.
So when you say words like
when you say
words like bespoke and handmade, or this is music to the ears of premium kitchen retail, because that's what they do, but they just are not accessing that knowledge of how they can use the existing skills, stuff to do this kind of thing correctly.
Yeah, and always the problem that we found with my original company, or the only company, Design Matters, was we struggled in the early days to work with standard manufacturers to make their products suit disabled people, because we always work with 72 centimetre high door, and doors, 2 cutlery drawers match a saucepan drawer, and so as soon as you want to throw a pull-out shelf or an extra unit or drawer or door front into that range of units, it threw everything else out. So you're having to make specials that have huge waste of space because you're cutting panels to block a hole up with. That was the really interesting fun bit working with Symphony and we did have to create new door sizes, but now we've included those in the range. Those door sizes are now standard. So we don't have there's no extra cost for having those special size doors, but now it allows them to site ovens to the millimetre to the required height that the client would need, for instance. I keep talking about ovens a lot, but anyway, there we go. There are other bits to it.
Yeah, and look, we're barely scratching the surface of all this, right? I totally get it. And I think the clock's probably beaten us here, but look, it's always brilliant to talk to you about this stuff. It really is. And I'm sure you agree, Simeon, it's always eye-opening when he starts talking about it, and you always come away from it thinking, oh, God, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah, it's fabulous because it gives you insight into how people really use things. And what it tells me is that we just need to ask intelligent questions to the right people, because actually, generally speaking, the solutions are already available to us in terms of standard products. The clever bit is having the designers actually design it in the right way.
It is. Well, look, Adam, brilliant to talk to you as always, mate. Thank you so much for your time.
Cheers.
Thank you, Adam.